My sister Brielle and I were never close. We were only 14 months apart, but the distance between us felt like decades. Growing up, she always had a sharper edge, quicker with her comebacks, colder in her affection, and somehow always more adored. When I got straight A's, it was expected. When she passed a class by the skin of her teeth, they celebrated like she'd won a Nobel Prize. I used to wonder what I'd done wrong, why the same last name didn't mean the same love. But I stopped asking around the time she turned 16 and started copying everything I wore. I should have seen it then, not admiration, but envy. And envy with nowhere to go becomes something poisonous. When she introduced me to her new boyfriend, Drew, he smiled too long and too wide. He looked me up and down in a way that made my skin itch. But when I brought it up to Brielle, she just rolled her eyes and said, "You're always so full of yourself." That was the first red flag, the first one I ignored, and it wouldn't be the last. My sister Brielle and I were only 14 months apart, but it felt like we were born into different families. She had this magnetic, louder, wilder, prettier in that chaotic way that drew people in. I was the quieter one. The one who followed the rules, the one who got good grades and never made a scene. At family gatherings, Brielle always found a way to be the center of attention, whether it was through drama or charm. I was the shadow people forgot was standing in the corner. And yet somehow, everything I did still managed to irritate her. If I wore a certain color, she wore it louder. If I got a compliment, she'd find a way to outshine it. I used to think she was just competitive. Later, I'd learn there's a difference between competition and cruelty. We shared a room until I was 17. That meant I had a front row seat to every whispered phone call, every slammed door, every reckless decision she made while our parents turned a blind eye. I remember once she got caught sneaking out, and instead of being grounded, she got a new phone. When I accidentally broke a plate washing dishes, I lost my weekend privileges. Our parents didn't treat us the same. Not even close. But I didn't complain. I told myself that maybe, one day, Brielle would grow out of her bitterness. That maybe she'd see me not as someone to beat, but as her sister. I held on to that hope longer than I should have. When Brielle brought Drew home, everything changed again. He was older, 3 years out of high school. Slick in the way guys who peak at 20 always are. He drove a black Charger and wore cologne that lingered in rooms long after he left. From the beginning, something about him felt wrong. His eyes lingered too long. His jokes landed a little too close to my skin. One night, when he stayed for dinner, I caught him staring at me across the tableau, a glance. Not a mistake, but a deliberate stare, like I was something on a menu. I looked away quickly, hoping no one noticed. But Brielle did. Her face stiffened, and she didn't speak to me for 2 days after that. When I brought it up, gently, privately, she didn't just dismiss it, she weaponized it. "Not everything's about you, Candence," she hissed. God, it must be exhausting thinking every guy wants you. I remember standing there, stunned, trying to make sense of how she'd turned my discomfort into narcissism. But that was Brielle's talent-twisting reality until you questioned your own instincts. After that, I avoided Drew. I'd skip out early when he was coming over, claim I had plans or homework or just a headache. I thought distance would protect me. I thought keeping quiet would keep the peace. But some silences only feed the storm. And the storm was already building. I just didn't see how close it was to breaking. The night everything shattered wasn't loud at first. It started with another one of those forced family dinners. The kind where our parents pretended everything was normal, where Brielle flaunted Drew like he was some kind of prize she'd won and I was just an ungrateful audience. I wasn't supposed to be there, I'd already said I was busy, but Mom insisted. "Just one dinner, Candence. For your sister." Like my discomfort was a small tax for the sake of appearances. So I showed up. I wore long sleeves even though it was warm out. Something about Drew always made me want to cover more of myself, like his gaze had temperature. He greeted me with a wink. I ignored it. Dinner was tension pretending to be conversation. Every time I spoke, Drew cut me off or smirked, like my words were beneath him. Brielle watched, amused, sipping wine like it was a game she controlled. At one point, Drew made a joke at my expense, something about how girls like Candance end up alone with cats and self-help books. Everyone laughed, except me. I looked at my parents. Nothing. Not a word. Just smiles. That was the moment I knew I wasn't just alone. I was invisible in my own family. After dinner, as I walked toward my car, I felt someone behind me. I turned. Drew. Hands in pockets. Smile too wide. "Hey," he said casually, like we were friends. "Got a minute?" I didn't answer. I tried to keep walking. That's when he grabbed my wrist. Not hard, not yet, but firm. Like he wanted to make a point. "Brielle thinks you're trying to come between us," he said, voice low. "She thinks you want me." I froze. "You know that's not true," I said, trying to pull away. He leaned in. "You sure? Because you've been looking at me." I shoved him. It was reflex. Not violent, just enough to make him let go. But that was all it took. His expression changed, like a mask slipping, and then his fist came down fast across my cheek, splitting skin, rattling bone. I fell backward, hitting the pavement with a sick thud. My vision blurred, everything muffled. I tasted blood. I heard a door slam from the house. Brielle's heels clicking fast against the concrete. Her voice, "What the hell did you do?" And then not to me, but to him. "You idiot. You're not supposed to leave marks." That was the moment I realized it wasn't an accident. It wasn't a loss of temper. It was orchestrated. She knew. Maybe she hadn't expected it to go that far, but she wanted something to happen. Something that would humiliate me, break me, silence me. I don't remember much of what happened after. I know I crawled to my car. I know my hands were shaking so badly I could barely fit the key in the ignition. I didn't go to the hospital that night. I didn't go to the police. I went home, locked the door, stared at my ruined face in the mirror. The swelling, the blood, the way my left eye was already turning purple. I took a photo. Then I sat on the bathroom floor and cried for hours. Not just from the pain, but from the realization that my sister, the girl who used to share my toys, who used to sleepwalk into my bed when she was scared, had become someone who would rather see me destroyed than deal with her own insecurities. And worse, my family would cover for her. I could already hear it. It was just a misunderstanding. "Don't escalate things. You'll tear the family apart." But my face was already torn, and something inside me was done being quiet. I didn't go to work the next day, or the day after. I couldn't. Not just because of the pain I could barely open my left eye, but because I knew if anyone saw me, the questions would start, and I wasn't ready. Not yet. I needed time. Time to think, to plan. I told my boss I had the flu, voice hoarse and shallow over the phone. He didn't push. I was always the dependable one, the quiet one, the one who never asked for anything, the kind of woman people forget until she suddenly isn't there. And I used that silence to my advantage. I spent those 3 days building a folder. Screenshots of text messages from Brielle's snide comments, veiled threats, the way she mocked me when I once told her Drew gave me the creeps. I found the photo of my bruised face. I added it. I dug through old voicemails and found one from 3 months ago. Brielle, drunk and laughing, saying, "If you ever try to take something from me again, I swear I'll ruin that pretty little face of yours." She meant it as a joke, but now it was evidence. I also made a call. Not to the police. Not yet. I called Ava. Ava was my best friend in college, now a nurse practitioner. She had always been the one person I could count on. When she answered and heard my voice low, Hesitant, uneven, she didn't ask if I was okay. She just said, "Where are you? I'm coming." And she did. She brought gauze and ointment and a quiet understanding that didn't demand explanations. She cleaned the wound on my cheek, looked me in the eye and said, "You need to report this." I nodded. "I will," I whispered. But even then, I wasn't sure if I believed it. What tipped me over wasn't a new bruise or another cruel text. It was what happened on the third night. I was sitting on my couch, trying to eat something, when I got a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. When I played it back, my stomach dropped. It was Drew. His voice low, threatening, casual. "You don't want to make this ugly, Candance. You think anyone's going to believe you? You're just jealous. Don't do something you'll regret." My hands shook. I dropped the phone. And that was it. I picked it back up, opened the recorder app, and saved the voicemail. Then I called the police. The officer who arrived was young, maybe younger than me. His name was Officer Ramos. He listened. He didn't interrupt. He looked at the photos, the messages, the voicemail. He didn't tell me it was just a domestic thing, or ask what I'd done to provoke it. He said, "This is serious. You did the right thing calling us." That sentence undid me more than the punch ever had. I cried, right there in front of him. He nodded like he'd seen it before. "We'll get a statement and go from there." Within 48 hours, they brought Drew in for questioning. He denied everything, of course. Said I was making it up. Said I was obsessed with him. That I'd always been unstable. But the evidence told another story. And when they showed him the voicemail, his face went pale. The mask cracked, just like it had the night he hit me. Brielle, of course, went nuclear. She called me screaming, accusing me of betrayal. "You're ruining my life," she spat. I told her, calmly, "You ruined your own life the moment you watched him hurt me, and did nothing." The silence that followed was the deepest I'd ever heard. The hearing came quicker than I expected. I thought I'd have time to breathe, to brace myself. But the court date was set within 2 weeks. In those 14 days, my life cracked open. Word spread in the family like wildfire. My cousin texted me asking, "Is it true you pressed charges against Drew?" Another message from my aunt. "I hope you know what you're doing, dear." Not one person asked if I was okay. Not one asked what happened. Brielle had gotten ahead of the story, painting herself as the victim of a vindictive sister who was jealous of her happiness. I knew the narrative well, she'd used it all our lives. But this time, I had more than my word. I had proof. The morning of the hearing, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. My face had healed some, but a faint scar curved near my left temple. My eyes soft, yielding had sharpened, hardened. There was a steadiness there now, one earned, not given. I pulled my hair into a low bun, slipped on a dark blue dress Ava had loaned me, and walked out the door with my head high. I wasn't going to win everyone's belief, but I was going to tell the truth. In the courtroom, Brielle sat beside Drew. They looked like they were playing dress-up, she in fake pearl earrings, he in a suit that didn't quite fit. She wouldn't look at me. He did. He smirked. I kept my eyes on the judge. When it was my turn to speak, I told the story as clearly as I could. No theatrics, no tears, just the facts. I showed the photos. I played the voicemail. The courtroom was so quiet, I could hear someone shifting in their seat 3 rows back. When it ended, I sat down and exhaled slowly, my hands trembling just beneath the table. Drew's lawyer tried to discredit me, called me emotional, unstable, said I had a history of exaggeration. It stung more than I expected. I thought I was prepared. But when the judge interrupted and said, "I've reviewed the evidence. Let's not insult the intelligence of this court," something inside me unclenched. They didn't arrest Drew on the spot. It doesn't work that way. But the judge issued a restraining order and referred the case to the DA. That was enough. For now. Enough to breathe again. Enough to walk home that night without looking over my shoulder. But the fallout had just begun. That weekend, my parents invited me to dinner. I knew it wasn't out of concern, it was damage control. Still, I went. I needed to know. Needed to see them look me in the eye and choose a side. They greeted me stiffly, like I was a stranger who might break the furniture. My mother pushed a plate toward my chicken and mashed potatoes, her usual olive branch. "You didn't have to make it public," she said quietly. "You embarrassed the family." My fork froze mid-air. "I embarrassed the family?" I asked. "He broke my face, Mom." Brielle watched. "And you're worried about your image?" My father spoke next, low and measured. "We just think there was another way. A private resolution." I stood up. There was another way. She could have stopped him. You could have believed me. But you all chose silence. I won't. I left without finishing the meal. That night, I posted the full story online. Not out of vengeance, out of necessity. Because women like McQuiet, accommodating, are often told to swallow pain to keep the peace. I was done swallowing. And the world listened. The post spread faster than I imagined. Within hours, it was shared hundreds of times. By the end of the week, it had reached over 1 million views. I didn't name Brielle or Drew directly, but the details were unmistakable to those who knew us. Screenshots of texts, anonymized clips of voicemail audio, photos of the bruises. I shared only what was necessary, never what would invite pity. I didn't want pity. I wanted accountability. And something strange happened. Strangers believed me. Women messaged me saying they'd been silenced by their families too. A former classmate of Brielle's messaged. "She bullied people in school too." "You're brave." Even an old teacher of mine commented anonymously. "You always had grace, even when others didn't see it. Thank you for speaking up." But not all messages were supportive. I got hate too. Attention seeker. Jealous sister. Another woman trying to ruin a man's life. At first, those words stung. Then I realized they echoed my mother's tone, my father's disapproval, Brielle's lifelong taunts. They weren't new. They were just louder now. And I had grown used to noise. What I wasn't used to was Drew's job finding out. Apparently, someone forwarded my post to the HR department at his tech firm. By the following Friday, he was placed on leave pending an internal investigation. Brielle tried to defend him online, but her comments only stirred more backlash. People started screenshotting her statements, comparing them to old tweets of hers, bragging about how people always listen to the prettier sister. It was brutal. And strangely, I started getting interview requests from blogs, podcasts, even a national morning show. I turned most of them down. This wasn't a performance. This was my life. But I accepted only a quiet, thoughtful podcast hosted by a survivor of family violence. Her questions weren't sensational. They were human. "What's been the hardest part of this?" she asked. "Knowing that people I loved looked away," I said. "That they still might." I didn't cry on air. But when I got home that night and saw Ava waiting on my porch with 2 cups of tea and a blanket, I let myself sob. Not for Drew. Not for Brielle. For the girl I had been at 15, begging to be seen. To be loved for who she was, not punished for who she wasn't. The media attention reached a boiling point when a former HR assistant at Drew's firm posted anonymously about a known incident of physical aggression at a company retreat a year prior. Nothing had been done then either. But now, with public pressure mounting, his company couldn't look away. They fired him. Brielle called me the next morning. Her voice was thin, trembling with rage and desperation. "You ruined our lives," she said. "Do you even care?" I didn't yell. I didn't hang up. I simply said, He ruined mine first. You watched. She was silent for a long time before the line went dead. That night, I received another letter. A formal notice from the district attorney's office. Charges were moving forward. Assault, witness, intimidation, and possibly complicity for Brielle, if it could be proven she encouraged or obstructed. It should have felt like triumph, but it didn't. It felt like ashes necessary, cleansing, but still remnants of something burned. Still, I slept deeper that night. Not because it was over, but because the silence was finally broken. Healing wasn't linear. There were no fireworks, no definitive days of triumph. Just long, quiet mornings, where I sat on the porch with tea, trying not to flinch at loud footsteps. Sometimes I still woke up gasping Drew's shadow in my mind, not my room. I started therapy, reluctantly at first. I didn't want to recount it all again, but the therapist didn't press. She just listened. And then she asked something I hadn't been prepared for. Who was Candace before all of this? I didn't know how to answer. So I started figuring it out. I returned to my sketchpad for the first time in years. I used to draw constantly portraits of people on the subway, trees outside my window, shoes I wished I could afford. I had stopped the day. Brielle laughed and said my shading looked like a toddler with a crayon. But when I picked up the pencil again, my hand remembered. It shook, but it remembered. I drew a woman standing at the edge of a cliff not falling, just watching the storm pass. It felt like a beginning. Meanwhile, Brielle's world continued to crack. Her circle, once made of curated brunch friends and carefully filtered photos, began to dissolve. People distanced themselves. Some publicly, others quietly. She posted passive-aggressive quotes, deleted half her feed, tried to pivot the narrative claiming I had always been jealous, that I had twisted the truth. But truth has a way of surviving scrutiny. I wasn't speaking out every day, but others were. Women who knew Drew. One even emailed me privately. She had dated him briefly and ended it after he punched a hole in a wall beside her face. She never told anyone before. Your story gave me permission to stop pretending it was nothing, she wrote. I printed that email out and taped it inside my journal. At work, I kept my head down. Most of my co-workers didn't know the details. A few approached with quiet support. A Varmi manager and friend remained my steady constant. She never asked for updates, only offered warmth. She once brought in a cake with "Courage tastes like chocolate" written on it in pink frosting. We laughed until we cried. But not everyone stayed quiet. A surprise came when our HR rep called me into her office. There's been a complaint filed by your sister, she said gently. She's alleging defamation even here. I blinked. I haven't said a word about her at work. I know, she said. That's why we're not pursuing anything. But I wanted you to be aware. It was like watching a drowning person throw water at the lifeboat. I went home early that day. Not in shame but in clarity. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about her spiraling, trying to take me down with her, and I wasn't going to let her. That weekend, I visited my childhood neighborhood. Not for nostalgia, for closure. The park where Brielle once pushed me off a swing and said it was an accident. The ice cream shop where Drew first met my parents. The church steps where I once sat in a torn dress after a birthday party fight. Everything looked smaller, but I felt taller. I left a small notebook on the church bench, me sketches. My memories, a message inside. This is what survival looks like. I don't know who picked it up. Maybe no one did. Maybe it's still there, waiting for someone else who needs it. But I walked away lighter. I didn't plan to see Brielle again. But life, in its twisted sense of humor, handed me an invitation I couldn't ignore. It was a charity gala, hosted by our old high school's alumni board, where both of us were unexpectedly honored as notable graduates. I stared at the embossed invitation for minutes. wondering if this was some cruel joke. But I went. Not to gloat. Not to start anything. I went to reclaim the space she had once infected with her lies and games. I wore a dark green dress, with sleeves long enough to hide the faintest of scars still healing. I didn't go with anyone. I didn't need to. The venue was stunning soft lighting, string quartet music humming in the background, waiters gliding between tables with flutes of champagne. And then I saw her, Brielle, dressed in red, of course. Red that demanded attention, even when undeserved. Her eyes met mine across the room, and for a second, the air thinned. Then she smiled. That slow, performative smile she always wore like armor. She approached. "Well," she said, "you look functional." I kept my voice even. "You look like you've rehearsed that line in the mirror all week." She flinched barely, but enough. "I suppose you're going to give a speech. Maybe draw more attention to your little recovery story." "I'm not here to make speeches," I replied. "I'm here because people invited me. They thought I mattered." She laughed, a high, brittle sound. "They only know one side of things." "No," I said. "They know enough. More than you ever allowed them to." Silence stretched between us. Around us, the gala buzzed on, unaware, uncaring. And then she leaned closer, her tone low. "You think you've won something, but people always get bored. They'll forget." "I don't need them to remember," I said. "I just needed to survive you." Her smile cracked. Finally. At that moment, the host called for the honorees to step forward. We both walked up, side by side. The applause was polite, generic, meaningless, until the school board chair began reading our names and accomplishments. When he reached mine, he paused, cleared his throat, and added, "Candance also recently established a scholarship fund for survivors of intimate violence." A quiet act of courage we felt deserved recognition. The room shifted. People looked at me differently. Not with pity, not with shock, with respect. Brielle stared ahead, frozen. She hadn't known. She hadn't been part of anything that mattered. After the ceremony, a few people approached me, only of them. A woman I didn't recognize who whispered, "I used to babysit for your sister. I'm so glad you're okay." Her voice trembled. I nodded. "Me too." As I left the venue later that night, I walked past Brielle one last time. She didn't speak, just watched me go. No parting insult, no fake smile. Just quiet. It was the first honest moment between us in years. Outside, the night air was cold and clear. I took a deep breath. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't tremble. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't even victory. It was peace. The kind you earn. The kind no one can take from you. Not even the person who tried to ruin your face because what she really wanted was to erase your existence. But I was still here. And this time, I wasn't leaving quietly. 6 months later, I stood in front of a small classroom filled with young women, each of them holding a folder with their names etched in gold. Survivors. Every one of them. Some had escaped abusive homes. Others were rebuilding after toxic relationships. All of them had dreams that needed just a little space, a little money, a little belief. That's what my scholarship program was for. And today, it was real. As I spoke to them, I could feel the scar on my cheek tug just slightly when I smiled. It didn't bother me anymore. It didn't own me. In fact, most days, I barely noticed it. And on the days I did, it reminded me not of the pain, but of the strength it took to keep going. After the session ended, one of the girls stayed behind. Her name was Lila. She was 19, quiet, and always kept her hoodie pulled halfway over her head. Today, she looked me in the eye. "Miss Candance," she said softly, "I didn't think I could ever feel proud again. But watching you, hearing your story, I think maybe I can. My throat tightened. I didn't say anything at first, just reached out and touched her shoulder. You already are, I whispered. Later that night, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea and the soft hum of Miles Davis playing in the background. The apartment was small but mine. On the windowsill sat a framed photo of my daughter and me from a trip we took years ago. Long before things went dark, she was still with me. Always. There were still nights I woke up panicked. Still days I flinched when a door slammed too loudly. But those moments passed quicker now. The fear had softened into memory. And the rage? I'd buried it in something stronger purpose. I hadn't heard from Brielle since the gala. Someone told me she'd moved out of state, that her boyfriend left her not long after. I didn't ask for more. I didn't need to know. Because the truth was, I didn't live in her shadow anymore. I didn't need an apology she'd never mean or an explanation that came too late. She had tried to break me, to silence me, but all she did was push me into a version of myself I never knew I could become. Not a victim. Not even just a survivor. But someone who built something better from the wreckage. The kind of woman who walks into a room scarred, unafraid, and absolutely unashamed. The kind of woman who makes other women believe again. And that, in the end, was louder than anything Brielle ever screamed.